think in the short run, it'll be very interesting to see if the world can actually come together and figure out what the pandemic, what the scientists naturally do, which is work together to figure out tests and vaccines, and if that then creates an environment of cooperation or if it remains one of competition. I think that'll have a lasting effect a bit on kind of whether or not competition or cooperation is what we see for the future. We have recovered from this before. I could take Jean-Marie's point about counterterrorism and expand it. I would imagine in 10 years, we're a lot better at having countries and their own populations rise up and say, we would like your support to implement a peace agreement versus just a little bit more of a top-down. Say it's the Colombia model, where there's a willingness and a commitment to peace that is presented to the international community and support is asked for. I think a lot of times we talk about this as whether the P5 will agree on it, but I think it depends a lot on what organically comes up. And it's hard for me not to imagine there's going to be a renewed need for that. There's a number of countries that have really faced horrific war and violence. And there'll be a point when they're like, this will be naturally coming to a conclusion, and it will need the UN, and will need broad peace operations. Also, I guess to something David just said, we need a bigger and broader toolkit to deal with some of these problems. Disinformation campaigns are now rampant, and how the UN handles information, strategic communications is on that list. We've already talked about protection of civilians. It's not just a task for UN missions, it's an assessment in the beginning of why civilians are in harm's way, why they're being targeted, and that the tools need to acclimate to that, working with local communities so that they themselves have the voice in what's going on. I also think in the future, climate issues could be a uniting factor for the Council. We're not there right now, but I can definitely imagine it, not just as a risk factor, but for a way to rethink how operations are even designed. Why do we have old containers that need air conditioning and heat? I would take up the Secretary General's challenge, and that the UN becomes 80% based on renewable energy by 2030, which he called for last fall at his climate summit. So I think there's some positive areas as well where the UN can really lead, and I look forward to that. Thank you.